Hi there, my name is Renee Hobbs, and this is COM 410 UnClassroom, seminar on digital learning in Rhode Island. Today I welcome Kira Keane from the Learning Accelerator, who's here to talk to us about communication strategy regarding increasing public awareness of digital learning in Rhode Island. Kira, can you tell us a little bit about your background and your current work at the Learning Accelerator?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thank you for inviting me. Actually, I love being part of an UnClassroom. Such a cool concept. So I'm a partner at the Learning Accelerator, and we are a nonprofit organization. We've been around really for only about a year and a half, and we are dedicated to bringing high-quality blended learning to schools across America. And we're really focusing on public schools because, frankly, 95% of all kids in America go to public schools. So we're talking 50 million kids. So we're really looking at impacting public education. My background, actually, I have more than 20 years experience in communications in lots of different ways. I was a press secretary for elected officials. I've run communications campaigns for bond measures and parcel taxes. I've run communications campaigns for foundations. I was a lobbyist, so I've done a lot of political communications in the policy world. So, and I'm a parent. I've taken 3 kids through public school and now off into college. So I understand what it's like to be one of these sort of key audiences that we need to talk to around blended learning. So I can tell you a little bit about the Learning Accelerator itself. We're kind of a unique organization. So what we're focusing on doing is trying to identify the major barriers that school districts face when they want to do blended digital learning. And once we see what those barriers are, we're trying to figure out the best solutions to overcoming them. And as we've identified those solutions, we're going to give a ton of money, a ton of attention, and try to scale that across the country. Now, we are also doing that with states, and Rhode Island happens to be our very first partner state. A few weeks ago, we made this announcement that Rhode Island is committed to becoming the first fully blended learning state in the country. So we're really excited to be working with Rhode Island on this, and that circles back to how we're going to be working together with your class.
Mute my microphone. So that was actually a really great introduction, and you helped us understand how digital learning and blended learning and the Learning Accelerator identity is really a change agent. Mm-hmm. Now, you talked about your experience as a communication strategist in a variety of different contexts, working in many different kinds of settings to build awareness and mobilize audiences. Can you talk to us about some of the key features that anybody who's getting into the business of communication strategy should be thinking about? Because students here at the Harrington School of Communication and Media and enrolled in this class are going to be really stepping into some pretty big shoes, trying to be communication strategists. And I bet you have some key ideas that could help them get a landscape of what they need to hold in their head as they develop the campaigns. Can you tell us about some of those key concepts?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's really some very fundamental building blocks to a communications campaign, and it doesn't matter if you're communicating about, the latest dog food brand or education reform. And the biggest first step is to know your audience. Like, who are you actually going to be communicating with? And in the case of Rhode Island, are you going to be talking to parents? Are you going to be talking to the business community? Are you going to be talking to other educators? Or perhaps your audiences are differentiated, by demographics, right? Are you speaking to seniors or the younger generation, or by socioeconomic indicators? So really getting clear on who your audiences are is very important. The next step is really understanding your audiences. And you can spend a lot of money, right, trying to understand your audiences. You can do surveys, you can do focus groups, you can do market research, and some companies and organizations do that. You may also be in a case where, hey, I live in this small town, I know my community, but oftentimes you want to do something in the middle, right? You want to do some sort of surveying, some sort of focus group, so that you really understand these audiences, what's important to them, what are their key buttons, their key issues, so that when you communicate with them, you can speak in the correct language. I'd say the third really important thing is to articulate your communications goals. So in this instance, when we listen to Rhode Island, who, they want to do a communications campaign around public awareness for digital learning, it's kind of broad. So, I would encourage your students, and as I will be doing this as well with Rhode Island, to maybe get a little crisper about, what does that really mean? What does public awareness and support mean? How do you want people to show that kind of support? So pushing a little bit and getting really crisp on your communications goals. Then there's sort of 4, I'd say, other steps. You want to create your key messages, right? You know your audiences, you know who they are, and based on that, you figure out, how do I best, what are the 3 or 4 main messages I want to give them, so that they understand what we're doing or are able to support, our concepts. It's also really important to identify how best to talk to them, right? So social media may not be the best way to reach out to the 70-plus-year-old audience. And email might not be for certain other groups. So you really have to catalog what are your communications vehicles, right? Is it public media or free media? Is it paid advertising? Is it newspaper articles? Is it meetings? There's all kinds of different vehicles for communications, and you have to identify which ones are best for each of your audiences. Then you have to regularly communicate, right, and really promote two-way engagement. Oftentimes we think communication is one way, just one direction, we're going to tell you this, but in fact really effective communications is when you allow some sort of dialogue or feedback. And you need to have some metrics of success, right? How do you determine if your campaign is successful, right? Are you going to survey people at the beginning of the campaign and then again at the end? Or are there some actions that you're going to ask these people to take that you can track? So your metrics of success is really important. So I'd say those are kind of the critical building blocks of a good communications campaign.
Thank you for sharing that. That actually does give us a great landscape, and it invites me to wonder with you about this issue of target audience. Students are enrolled in this class for only a short period of time. We have to do a kind of modest scope of inquiry because of that tight time frame. And right now, students are in the phase of reflecting on their own attitudes and beliefs about digital learning, because many of these young people came out of schools where they had some exposure to digital learning really within the last 3 to 5 years. But I wonder if you were going to give us some guidance on if we could only tackle one target audience, and we have this tight time frame based on the knowledge and experiences of undergraduate students, what target audiences, or what one sliver of a target audience might be most productive for undergraduate students at the University of Rhode Island to dig into?
I mean, I would say the audience that you know. Since you don't have time to sort of do deep market research into some of these other audiences, I mean, maybe think about it, people who are 18 to 25 or, 18 to 30, and to think about, these are in some ways technical digital natives, but like you said, they may not have experience with truly what blended learning is in their classroom. And I do encourage your students to watch either one of our very short videos on blended learning, because it really gives a nice visualization of what it is that we're talking about when we do it. So I think that's a great idea. It's a great point to kind of maybe target an audience and have your class focus on that targeted audience and have it be an audience that they inherently know, instinctively know.
That is really helpful feedback. Thank you so much for sharing that. And so what you just said reminds me about something I've been wanting to ask you, and that has to do with the nomenclature issue.
Oh, yeah.
What the heck is the difference?
It's a great question.
Learning, digital literacy, blended learning, connected learning. How do you see the nomenclature issue, and how will we need to be thinking about the nomenclature issue as we develop our communication campaign?
It's a great question, and it is a challenge and an opportunity. How do you communicate about something that you're not even sure what to name, right? And in this instance, blended learning is the blend. It's a blend of great teacher-led instruction in the classroom with some level of digital online learning. And we really like to focus on blended learning because we do think the teacher part is so important. If you just talk about digital learning or online learning, a lot of people may worry that, oh, it's just sticking a kid in front of a computer screen, right? And there's a lot of concern by parents and others about that. And if you talk about personalized learning, you can personalize learning without technology, right? You could just, it would take a lot of time and a lot of effort, but good teachers have been doing that for a long time. They call it just differentiated instruction. But we think where the magic lies is in blending the power of technology and really integrating it effectively in the classroom so that it empowers teachers and then allows for personalized learning and allows for mastery-based progression, which we think is sort of the key to this transformation we're talking about. So we're not set on the nomenclature. President Obama calls it personalized digital learning. Rhode Island has been talking about digital learning, but is starting to talk about blended more specifically. So I think what it will be a challenge for your students is to come up with a term or to identify a group of these terms that make sense to their audience. So that's a non-answer, but
no, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Of course, as a proponent of digital and media literacy, I'm always looking for how that phrase is articulated in the literature. I was happy to see a piece in today's New York Times that uses that phrase. But ultimately, I think for the purposes of the communication campaign, identifying a small cluster of phrases or one key phrase, and then recognizing that within that phrase are nuances of meaning, right? The experts always are going to have lots of ways to differentiate, but at the public level, those distinctions aren't so central. But go ahead.
I was just going to say, it kind of goes back to your communications goal. If your communications goal is really just public awareness, then you want it to be a simple concept to grasp. And like you said, you don't have to be in the weeds of all these differences.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I guess I want to invite you to give us some suggestions about like what works and what doesn't work, because I think that the strategy that overall we're going to try to do is find and interview and talk to the most innovative educators we can and tell their stories in a way that's compelling, letting essentially the educators and the students speak for themselves. But plenty of things can go wrong in a communication campaign, and I want to ask your guidance and your insight around things we might want to be cautious about as we start thinking about identifying core messaging or moving forward with this campaign.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something actually I'm struggling is not the right word, but wrestling with in talking to the Rhode Island Department of Education, because their instinct is great. They want to do a communications campaign, but oftentimes a state agency is not necessarily the best messenger around an idea or a concept, and having some sort of top-down government communications campaign that's very prescriptive, like you guys need to be doing this, or you should be doing this, if you're not doing it, you've been bad. That's not often the most effective way to get people to feel good about a concept. In fact, teachers and students are the best messengers, right? They're trusted messengers. If they're enthusiastic and authentically excited about what is happening in their classroom, that is priceless communications right there, because it's real. And so I think your thought of highlighting blended learning, digital learning from the classroom up is fantastic, and it's really what we're thinking a lot about. How do we do that across the country to have this sort of be a bottom-up campaign as opposed to a real top-down communications campaign?
Yeah, one of the things I'm wondering about is, let's say I can certainly imagine my students going in and doing video interviews and gathering information from superintendents and principals and teachers. I wonder a little bit about whether my students can bring cameras into classroom. I wonder about the issues of releases, and I'm not exactly sure what strategies have been most effective in the past on sort of depicting the magic classroom activity, but also being sensitive to the fact that children don't control the rights to their identity. If the kid says yes, that's not the only permission that I might need. If a school has a blanket publicity waiver that gets signed at the beginning of the year, we might be in a better shape. help me understand like strategies we might use to think through this issue of how do we represent authentically children and learners engaged in action under these kind of contexts?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say more and more schools are moving towards that sort of blanket release that parents will sign at the beginning of the year. So at least even in making our own video that your kids will see, one or two of the schools had a blanket release that was very easy. We were able to identify the kids that we were not allowed to film. And then for another school, we had to specifically get parental release for it. And it's very important. That is, student data privacy is a huge hot button issue in the education technology world right now. So I think being sensitive to that is critical, and it's kind of the groundwork you'll need to lay before you go into a school to make sure that you're not stepping in that. The other thing is to be really clear where this information will be shared. Is it going to be on YouTube, so totally publicly available? And in this instance, we might know. I mean, I would certainly love to be able to see what your students come up with to see if we could use it ourselves.
So I know that one of the reasons why Learning Accelerator is committing the dollars and the human resources to this initiative is in order to address the equity issue. And so I think for our last topic of conversation, you're completely aware of the great big gaps that exist in Rhode Island between communities that are actively involved in pursuing digital learning through one-to-one laptop programs and through other, initiatives that put a lot of emphasis on staff development, and the communities where there isn't as much focus. And I think I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about your perceptions of where are the opportunities to address the equity issues when it comes to digital learning, and I guess more broadly when it comes to public education more generally. Can you share your thoughts and ideas about the...
Yes, I'd be happy to. Can you hear me? It's a huge issue. The academic achievement gap is something that we feel very passionately about addressing. And part of that stems from an education system that we've had that is really very much a factory model. And, you're studying fractions, but it's now April, so it's time to move to decimals. And if you don't really get fractions, it's sort of too bad. And so we're seeing the situation where, we've got children graduating from 8th grade at a 2nd grade reading level, and, this type of achievement gap. With personalized digital blended learning, that is not allowed to happen, because with what the technology is allowed to do is show teachers right away when there's a gap, when there's a problem, and you only progress as you gain competence in that subject area. So you don't get this Swiss cheese effect of kids can graduate with these giant holes in their knowledge and then in their understanding. Now, as you take that personalization, when you see and identify kids that have problems, then the teachers are allowed to come in and intervene much more quickly in a much more targeted way, right? And what we've seen through blended learning programs so far is that kids are able to accelerate as they work through their material, and they don't have these huge gaps. The equity issue is also around digital literacy, though. I mean, there's a lot of communities that don't have access to computers at home, don't have the opportunity to tap into the internet and the knowledge that's there. And so part of what education technology and blended learning can do is increase those digital skills, those 21st century skills that are so critical that every kid needs to have. And I will say, I do want to mention one other thing, which I think is kind of an interesting big concept your students should think about as they think about blended learning, and it relates to this 21st century skills. So when we talk about achievement and success for students, it's clearly academic success, but it's more than that. It's other things like grit and resilience and self-direction and motivation. And when you're in a blended classroom, and you'll see some of this from the videos that we put together, the kids are very engaged. They're very in control of their own learning path because it's an individual learning path. They're not embarrassed to raise their hand, right, if they don't know the question, because they're moving at their own pace. And those are non-cognitive, non-academic skills, but they're critically important to be college ready, to be job ready, and just to be a great citizen. So these are things that we think are really great big themes to think about as well when you're communicating about blended learning.
Oh, I'm so glad that you are raising that great question. This spring, we had the opportunity on the URI campus to participate in the world premiere of a wonderful little video, very short, maybe only a 7-minute video, but it was kind of a viral thing. It was called The Science of Character by a filmmaker named Tiffany Schlain. And she
lives in my town.
Yeah, she's awesome. And I think she's terrific. And her little video talks a little bit about those traits that get promoted in this more personalized, more inquiry-oriented learning, where you're not just a passive recipient, but you're really an active participant. And I think that, in a way, is a great way for us to conclude the interview, because I think my students have experienced a little bit of that grit and tenacity working in this fully online class. And of course, now we're about to take on the challenge of designing the campaign. You've given us much to think about. Kira, I hope we have a chance to get your feedback on our ideas as we continue to draft them, and so we'll look forward to seeing you further on in the semester. But thanks so much for sharing your time with us today, and I really appreciate you joining us, and also for those of you who are watching live, and the students of COM 410 at the Harrington School of Communication and Media. Thanks again for joining us, Kara. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.